In lesson 6.3, we're going to look at sanitizing seed. So in our previous sections, when we talked about sanitation and hygiene, we were often talking about our workspace, but now we want to move into the realm of seed. So, as I mentioned earlier, here in Canada, microgreens are considered sprouts, which are considered a high-risk product. And this is due to a number of pathogen outbreaks that have occurred over the past 30 to 40 years. And they do still happen from time to time, though this is the case with a lot of food products. So the thing that's important to understand here is that seed is the most likely source of pathogen. And we're growing the seed in an environment that really facilitates microbial growth. So while most of the focus on hygiene and seed sanitation has been on sprouts grown in water-based systems, it still does apply to soil-based systems. And in particular now, because there have been some Listeria mono outbreaks in Canada and the US associated with sprout production in soil, so with microgreens. So it's important to really keep this in mind. It really is something that's going to be on the radar more and more with American and Canadian authorities. So even though in the US, for example, sprouts and microgreens are differentiated product-wise, I think that it's important to acknowledge what they have in common. So number one is they're grown with using dense volumes of seed, which means the seed is packed really close together. So when seed is your most likely pathogen source, it's also easy for it to transfer from one seed to another if they're close together. And generally, that seed is a good food source, and they're usually moist because they're in a germination phase, and they're often being kept in a place that's warm. So conditions are really good, not just for seed growth, but for pathogen growth as well. Now, usually we're growing microgreens in a controlled, usually indoor environment, and so that means it's enclosed. Usually, if our environmental controls aren't good, that raises our risk of contamination. And then the third thing is, as I mentioned, they're grown in optimum conditions for microbial growth. So for sprouts, we want a food source, in essence, with the soil. We want moisture, we want heat, and this is exactly what microorganisms and pathogens want as well. So whether or not microgreens are viewed as sprouts in your region or in your country, I think it's important to keep these similarities in mind and to take precautionary measures. And even though sanitizing seed is another step, it's not particularly expensive relative to the whole process of production. So here's just a excerpt from the CFIA guidelines on sprout production. And here are some of the recommendations for using sodium hypochlorite or hydrogen peroxide as a sanitizer. As I mentioned, in the US, it used to be that the required sanitizer was 20,000 parts per million of bleach, but now it just needs to be something that is effective, though I would make sure you do your homework on that to make sure you know exactly what's required. So the numbers come from somewhere. If you remember, I showed you earlier the dilution rate for bleach in a spray bottle is 200 parts per million. So you can see we're using different concentrations for different purposes. So as an alternative to bleach, and actually as a requirement for organic certification, hydrogen peroxide or peracetic acid or peroxyacetic acid are good alternatives to bleach. And if you're certified organic in Canada, I don't believe you can use bleach anymore as a seed sanitizer. So one of the products that we've used is called Sanidate. So it's made up of hydrogen peroxide, peroxyacetic acid, and acetic acid. So these are actually just all different combinations of similar chemicals. And the label gives for Sanidate gives a bunch of different dilution options for different situations, whether it's for surfaces, whether it's for produce. And so I think the important thing is to look at that label and determine what sanitizing rate you feel comfortable with. And I believe the food peddler's rate is currently at about 147 or 200, something like that, parts per million in terms of the dilution rate, which is the rate that's effective on surfaces for E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria mono. And what we do is we generally soak the seed for quite a long time in that. So not just 10 minutes, but maybe half an hour to 2 hours. And in the case of pea shoots, we actually soak them overnight in that. And so while the sanitizing is taking place, it's also the time that the seeds are being induced into germination. So if you've got some options for sanitizing your seed, we'll talk more about the process of sanitizing seed when we get into the production section. But know that, yeah, there are some options out there for certified organic production, as well as being able to use bleach for just non-certified organic production as well. As I mentioned, though, like one of the things you have to do is start with clean seed. And so, you can't go to your grocery store and just pick some bulk seed out of a bin. You cannot, and please do not, use bird seed, which clearly says right on it, not for human consumption. I see this question pop up again and again with sunflower seed because people are trying to save money and get an inexpensive seed source. But that seed has not been handled in a way that can give you any assurance whatsoever that it's going to be free of pathogens. And the pathogens that we're worried about aren't the same things that are going to affect other birds and other animals. So we're concerned about human pathogens in this case. So it's really important to start with seed that has been pathogen tested, and then to have a process of rinsing, sanitizing, and rinsing again that seed. So you're going through multiple steps to make sure it's clean. And we will get into that in detail as we get into the production process. So that's the end of sanitizing seed.